Throughout history, the quest for knowledge and advancement has led humanity down some of the most groundbreaking yet ethically complex paths. Welcome to our deep dive into the world of human experiments, a realm where science, ethics, and human resilience intersect in ways that fascinate and disturb. In the next few minutes, we will unravel the secrets, the controversies, and the groundbreaking outcomes of experiments that have pushed the boundaries of what it means to be human. All right, without further ado, let's start by examining the experiments that make up the tip of the iceberg. These experiments have garnered significant attention over the years, which you might have already heard about. Our first stop on this journey is the infamous Stanford prison experiment, conducted by Dr. Philip Zimbardo in 1971. In this study, college students were randomly assigned to play the roles of prisoners and guards in a simulated prison environment. The shocking results raised important questions about the effects of power and authority on human behavior. It's a study that continues to be a subject of debate and scrutiny in psychology. The Stanford prison experiment serves as a stark reminder of how easily ordinary individuals can adopt abusive behaviors when placed in positions of power. Participants who were assigned the role of guards exhibited abusive and authoritarian behavior towards their fellow participants, the prisoners. The study had to be terminated prematurely after just 6 days due to the severe psychological effects it had on the participants. Dr. Zimbardo's findings revealed the profound effect of situational factors on human behavior and the ethical challenges of conducting research with vulnerable populations. It also highlighted the importance of strict ethical guidelines in psychological research, mainly when it involves potential harmful psychological effects on participants. To fully comprehend the significance of the Stanford prison experiment, we need to delve deeper into the details of this controversial study and explore its far-reaching implications for psychology and society. The Stanford prison experiment was conceived by Dr. Philip Zimbardo, a psychologist at Stanford University, to understand how people's behaviors could be influenced by their assigned roles. The study was designed to simulate a prison environment and observe how participants would adapt to their assigned roles as prisoners or guards. 24 male college students were selected for the study and carefully screened for psychological stability. They were randomly assigned to the roles of prisoners or guards, with the flip of a coin determining their assignments. The simulated prison was set up in the basement of Stanford University's psychology building, complete with prison cells, uniforms, and even a mirrored observation room for researchers to monitor the participants. Initially, the participants took their roles lightly, and the experiment began without any apparent signs of trouble. However, within just a few days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Those assigned to be guards began to exhibit abusive and degrading behavior towards the prisoners, and the prisoners themselves showed signs of emotional distress and helplessness. Guards enforced arbitrary rules, subjected prisoners to humiliating tasks, and engaged in psychological torment. Prisoners were stripped of their individuality, referred to only by their assigned numbers, and were made to endure various forms of degradation. Some prisoners began to show signs of extreme stress, anxiety, and depression, while others exhibited passive compliance, seemingly resigning themselves to their roles. The Stanford prison experiment was initially planned to last for 2 weeks. Still, it had to be terminated after only 6 days due to the severe psychological toll it had on the participants. Several guards had become increasingly sadistic, and prisoners were experiencing severe emotional distress. The ethical implications of continuing the study became untenable, and Dr. Zimbardo decided to halt it prematurely. The ethical controversies surrounding the Stanford prison experiment are profound and continue to generate debate within psychology. Critics argue that the study exposed participants to undue psychological harm as they were subjected to emotional abuse and humiliation. Informed consent was also questioned, as the participants were unaware of the potential damage they could experience. Furthermore, the blurred line between the researcher and the prison superintendent's role led to an ethical quagmire. Dr. Zimbardo became too emotionally involved in the experiment, failing to recognize the harm inflicted on the participants until it was almost too late. This raises concerns about the responsibilities of researchers when conducting experiments that could potentially harm participants. Dr. Zimbardo published his findings in a book titled The Lucifer Effect: Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. In his book, he delves deeper into the psychological mechanisms during the Stanford prison experiment and real-world situations where individuals commit heinous acts. One of the key takeaways from Dr. Zimbardo's work is the concept of banality of evil, which suggests that ordinary people can commit terrible acts when placed in certain situations that strip them of personal responsibility and accountability. The Stanford prison experiment is a stark example of how situational factors can override an individual's moral compass, leading them to engage in harmful behaviors. The lessons from the Stanford prison experiment extended far beyond the walls of the simulated prison. It has profoundly impacted our understanding of human behavior in various contexts, from law enforcement and the military to organizational management and everyday social interactions. For example, in law enforcement, the study's findings shed light on the potential for abuse of power and authority. The abusive behaviors exhibited by the guards in the experiment are reminiscent of instances of police brutality and misconduct that have garnered widespread attention in recent years. The study is a cautionary tale, emphasizing the importance of proper training, oversight, and accountability within law enforcement agencies. In the military, the Stanford prison experiment highlights the risks of giving soldiers unchecked authority in conflict zones. Incidents of abuse and mistreatment of prisoners of war have occurred in various conflicts throughout history, and the study's insights underscore the need for strict codes of conduct and ethical guidelines for military personnel. Beyond law enforcement and the military, the Stanford prison experiment also influenced our understanding of organizational dynamics. It underscores the importance of creating a positive and ethical workplace culture in corporate settings. When leaders and managers abuse their authority or create toxic environments, it can harm employee morale, mental health, and overall productivity. The study's findings have prompted organizations to implement ethical training programs, codes of conduct, and whistleblower protections to ensure that power is not abused within their ranks. It serves as a stark reminder that individuals in positions of authority must be held accountable for their actions, and that organizations are responsible for creating environments where ethical behavior is the norm. The Stanford prison experiment also resonated with social and political movements, particularly those focused on human rights and social justice. Activists often refer to the study to highlight the dangers of unchecked power and the potential for individuals to become complicit in oppressive systems. For instance, during the civil rights movement, the study was cited as evidence of the systemic racism and brutality inherent in the prison system and law enforcement agencies. It contributed to the discourse surrounding the need for criminal justice reform and the importance of addressing issues such as racial profiling, excessive use of force, and mass incarceration. Despite its significant impact on psychology and society, the Stanford prison experiment remains controversial and criticized. Some psychologists have questioned the study's validity, arguing that the participants' behaviors may have been influenced by demand characteristics, the participants' perceptions of what the researchers expected, rather than genuine changes in personality or behavior. Additionally, concerns have been raised about the ethics of conducting such a study, particularly given the harm inflicted on the participants. Ethical standards in psychology research have evolved since the 1970s, and many argue that the survey would never gain approval in today's research environment. Researchers have recently conducted replications and variations of the Stanford prison experiment to explore its findings further and address some of the criticisms. These replications have provided mixed results, some studies replicating the original findings to varying degrees, while others still need to. One such replication, the BBC Prison Study, was conducted by Alex Haslam and Steve Riker in 2001. This study challenged the conclusions of the Stanford prison experiment by suggesting that leadership and societal identity play a more significant role in shaping behavior than simply assigning people to positions of power and authority. These ongoing debates and replications underscore the complexity of human behavior and the need for a nuanced understanding of the factors that influence it. The Stanford Prison Experiment is a landmark study in psychology, offering valuable insights into the effects of power, authority, and situational factors on human behavior. Despite its controversies and criticisms, it has impacted our understanding of how ordinary individuals can be influenced to engage in abusive or unethical behavior when placed in specific roles. The study's implications reach far beyond academia, influencing our understanding of law enforcement, the military, organizational dynamics, and social and political movements. It serves as a cautionary tale and a call for action for ethical conduct, oversight, and accountability in positions of authority. While the ethical concerns surrounding the study are valid and must be acknowledged, it is undeniable that the Stanford Prison Experiment has contributed significantly to our collective knowledge of human behavior and the mechanisms that drive individuals to both acts of cruelty and acts of courage. As we continue to grapple with the lessons of this controversial study, we are reminded of the ongoing need for responsible and ethical research to understand the human psyche. Next up is the Milgram experiment, conducted by psychologist Stanley Milgram in the early 1960s. This study focused on obedience to authority figures and revealed how ordinary people could commit morally questionable actions when instructed by an authority figure. The shockingly high levels of obedience demonstrated in this experiment continue to haunt our understanding of human behavior and ethics. Stanley Milgram's experiment sought to understand how individuals could commit acts against their moral principles when influenced by authority figures. In the study, participants were led to believe that they were administering increasingly severe electric shocks to another person, who was actually an actor feigning distress. What is particularly disturbing about the Milgram experiment is that a significant percentage of participants continued to administer shocks even when they believed they were causing extreme pain or harm to the other person solely because they were following orders from an authority figure. This study challenged the notion that only sadistic or malevolent individuals could engage in harmful behavior. It demonstrated that ordinary people could act in ways that contradicted their moral values under the right circumstances. The ethical implications of the Milgram experiment continue to be discussed in psychology and ethics, highlighting the significance of obtaining informed consent and ethical oversight in research involving human subjects. Stanley Milgram's experiment was designed to investigate the phenomenon of obedience to authority figures, particularly in the context of unethical or morally questionable actions. The study was conducted at Yale University in 1961, and it involved three leading roles: the experimenter, an authority figure; the teacher, the participant; and the learner, an actor. The participant or teacher was tasked with administering increasingly severe electric shocks to the learner whenever they answered a question incorrectly. Unbeknownst to the participant, the learner was an actor who did not receive shocks but pretended to be distressed. The shocks were not natural, but the participants believed they were causing genuine pain and harm to another person. The critical element of the experiment was the authority figure, the experimenter, who would instruct the participant to continue administering shocks, even when the participant expressed concerns or hesitation. The experiment measured the extent to which individuals would obey these commands from an authority figure. The results of the Milgram experiment were shocking and deeply troubling. Despite witnessing signs of distress and hearing pleas from the learner to stop, a significant portion of participants continued to administer shocks as instructed by the experimenter. Many participants exhibited extreme distress but hesitated to question or disobey the authority figure. In the original study, approximately 65% of participants administered the highest level of shock, 450 volts, to the learner. This level of obedience to authority, even when it meant causing severe harm to another person, sent shockwaves through the field of psychology and raised profound ethical concerns. The Milgram experiment raised a host of ethical dilemmas that continue to be debated and scrutinized to this day. One of the most significant concerns was the psychological distress and potential long-term harm inflicted on the participants. Many participants reported feelings of guilt, anxiety, and confusion after realizing the true nature of the experiment. Informed consent was a major ethical issue. Participants needed to be fully aware of the potential psychological harm they could experience, as they were misled about the nature of the study. This deception compromised their ability to make an informed decision about their participation. The study also ignited a debate about the responsibility of researchers in conducting experiments that involve potential harm to participants. Milgram's role as an authority figure in the experiment created a power dynamic that made it difficult for participants to challenge or question his instructions. This raises questions about researchers' ethical responsibilities when conducting experiments involving authority figures. Over the years, the Milgram experiment has faced criticism and questions regarding its reproducibility. Some argue that the original study's findings may not be as robust as initially believed. Replication attempts have yielded mixed results, some studies showing similar levels of obedience and others demonstrating lower levels of compliance. This ongoing debate highlights the complexities of human behavior and the various factors that can influence obedience. Factors such as cultural differences, individual personality traits, and the perceived legitimacy of the authority figure may play a role in determining the extent to which individuals obey harmful commands. The Milgram experiment's real-world relevance extends beyond the confines of the laboratory. It has been cited in discussions of various historical events and contemporary issues. During the Nuremberg trials following World War II, where Nazi war criminals were prosecuted for their actions, the defense of just following orders was a recurring argument. The Milgram experiment was frequently invoked to challenge this defense, emphasizing that individuals have a moral responsibility to question and resist unethical commands, even when they come from authority figures. In contemporary issues, the experiment has been used to analyze obedience in the context of police brutality and misconduct. It serves as a reminder of the importance of accountability and ethical behavior within law enforcement agencies. The Milgram experiment also contributed to the concept of the banality of evil, a term coined by political theorist Hannah Arendt. This concept suggests that individuals can commit heinous acts not out of inherent malice, but due to their compliance with authority and willingness to conform to the prevailing norms of a given system. The experiment demonstrated that when placed in the right circumstances, ordinary people can engage in actions that contradict their moral values. This concept has profoundly impacted discussions of morality, ethics, and human behavior in conflict and crisis situations. The Milgram experiment continues to be a subject of controversy and debate within psychology and ethics. While it has provided valuable insights into obedience to authority, the ethical concerns raised by the study have led to significant changes in how psychological research is conducted. Modern research involving human subjects strongly emphasizes informed consent, debriefing, and minimizing potential harm. Ethical oversight committees ensure that studies are conducted with the utmost consideration for the well-being of the participants. The Milgram experiments remains a chilling reminder of the power of authority and the potential for ordinary individuals to commit morally questionable actions under its influence. While it has faced ethical criticism and debates about reproducibility, its impact on our understanding of human behavior and ethics is undeniable. The study's enduring relevance in discussions of obedience, authority, and moral responsibility underscores the need for ongoing ethical scrutiny and psychological research. It challenges us to consider the ethical boundaries of scientific inquiry and the moral responsibilities of individuals in positions of authority. Ultimately, the Milgram experiment serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the importance of critical thinking, moral courage, and ethical awareness in the face of authority, and it continues to shape our understanding of human behavior and the complex interplay between obedience and ethics. Now let's turn our attention to the Tuskegee syphilis study, one of the most notorious cases of medical research misconduct. The U.S. Public Health Service conducted this study for 4 decades, from 1932 to 1972. Shockingly, African American men with syphilis were left untreated, even after effective treatments became available, leading to severe health consequences and raising questions about ethics and racial discrimination. The Tuskegee syphilis study stands as a dark chapter in the history of medical research and ethical oversight. The study involved the unethical and inhumane treatment of African American men in Macon County, Alabama, who were unknowingly enrolled in the study to observe the natural progression of syphilis. Despite the availability of effective treatment, penicillin for syphilis in the mid-1940s, the participants were never informed about the available cure and were instead left untreated. The study continued for 4 decades, during which participants suffered from debilitating effects of syphilis, which often led to severe health problems and even death. The ethical violations of the Tuskegee syphilis study are profound. Participants were denied informed consent, and their trust in healthcare providers was egregiously betrayed. The study also highlighted racial discrimination in research, as the participants were primarily African American. The aftermath of this study led to significant changes in research ethics and the establishment of regulations to protect the welfare and entitlements of research participants. The Tuskegee syphilis study serves as a painful reminder of the consequences of unchecked scientific ambition and the importance of ethical oversight in medical research. The Tuskegee syphilis study began in 1932, during a time when there was limited understanding of the natural course of syphilis. The U.S. Public Health Service initiated the study to document the progression of the disease in African American men, many of whom were sharecroppers in rural Alabama. Most of these men had limited access to healthcare and were lured into the study under the pretense of free medical care. Initially, the participants in the study needed to be made aware of the true nature of their participation. They were told that they were receiving treatments for bad blood, a term often used locally to describe various ailments. This lack of informed consent was a critical ethical violation from the outset. As the years went by, the true horror of the Tuskegee syphilis study unfolded. Even when penicillin, a highly effective treatment for syphilis, became widely available in the mid-1940s, the participants were intentionally kept in the dark about the cure. They continued to suffer from the ravages of the disease, which can lead to severe health issues such as heart problems, blindness, paralysis, and even death. The study involved regular medical examinations and painful spinal taps to track the progression of syphilis, all conducted without the participants' informed consent. The healthcare professionals interested in the study, including doctors and nurses, knew the truth about the available treatment but chose to withhold this information. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Tuskegee syphilis study was its racial dimension. The vast majority of the participants were African American, and this fact raises serious questions about racial discrimination in medical research. The study reinforced the troubling history of exploitation and mistreatment of African Americans in the pursuit of science inquiry. The participants, who were often poor and lacked access to adequate health care, were vulnerable to exploitation. Their trust in the medical establishment was shattered when they learned the truth about the study decades later. The profound breach of faith and the ethical violations committed against them have had lasting repercussions on the African American community's relationship with the healthcare system. The Tuskegee syphilis study might have continued indefinitely if not for the efforts of a few individuals who exposed its unethical nature. In 1972, Peter Buxton, a former U.S. Public Health Service employee, leaked information about the study to the press. This revelation sparked public outrage and led to the immediate termination of the analysis. The public outcry and media coverage prompted investigations and hearings, including establishing the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. The Commission's work ultimately resulted in developing ethical guidelines and regulations for research on human subjects. The Tuskegee syphilis study's legacy is a painful reminder of the importance of ethical oversight in medical research. It led to significant changes in research ethics, including the requirement for informed consent, the establishment of institutional review boards to review and approve research involving human subjects, and regulations to protect the protection and interests of research participants. Furthermore, the study exposed the deeply rooted issues of racial discrimination in medical research and healthcare. It underscored the need for equity, diversity, and inclusion in clinical trials and research studies to ensure everyone is treated respectfully and with dignity. In 1997, the U.S. government formally apologized to the surviving participants and their families. The government also established the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program, providing medical and healthcare benefits to those affected by the study. While these actions were necessary steps towards acknowledging the harm done, they cannot fully undo the physical and emotional suffering endured by the participants. The Tuskegee syphilis study remains a chilling example of medical research misconduct, ethical violations, and racial discrimination in the field of healthcare. It serves as a vivid illustration for the need for ethical oversight, informed consent, and the protection of vulnerable populations in research. While significant progress has been made in research ethics and regulations since the study's exposure, the scars left by the Tuskegee syphilis study continue to influence the way we approach medical research and healthcare disparities. It is a solemn lesson in the potential consequences of unchecked scientific ambition and the importance of ethical responsibility in all aspects of scientific inquiry. And lastly in this segment, we can't ignore the horrifying Nazi medical experiments during World War II. While we won't delve into the details now, these experiments, often conducted in concentration camps, were some of the most abhorrent and inhumane acts in the name of science. The Nazi medical experiments conducted during World War II were among the most horrific examples of human experimentation in history. These experiments, often performed in concentration camps, involved the deliberate torture, mutilation, and killing of prisoners under the banner of scientific research. These experiments had no scientific merit, and the subjects were subjected to unspeakable suffering. The Nazi medical experiments are an unmistakable signal of the depths to which unethical research can plummet when unchecked by moral and ethical constraints. While these experiments were incomprehensibly cruel, they have played a significant role in shaping modern research ethics. The Nuremberg Code, established after the Nuremberg trials, laid the foundation for ethical principles in human experimentation and emphasized the need for informed consent and voluntary participation. The Nazi medical experiments are an eerie reminder of the depths of cruelty and inhumanity that can be reached when scientific research is divorced from ethical principles and moral considerations. These experiments were conducted with a complete disregard for the sanctity of human life, resulting in immense suffering and death for the victims. Perhaps the most infamous figure associated with the Nazi medical experiments is Dr. Josef Mengele. Stationed at Auschwitz, he conducted a series of gruesome experiments on inmates, particularly twins. Mengele's experiments included injecting chemicals into the eyes of twins to change their eye color, sewing twins together to create conjoined twins, and subjecting them to extreme temperatures to study hypothermia. Mengele's actions were characterized by sadism and a complete lack of empathy. He saw his subjects as mere objects for experimentation, showing no regard for their suffering or lives. His experiments resulted in the death of many victims, and those who survived were often left with severe physical and psychological scars. Another notorious figure in the Nazi medical experiments was Dr. Sigmund Rascher. He conducted high-altitude experiments on inmates at Dachau concentration camp. Prisoners were subjected to simulated high-altitude conditions in low-pressure chambers, leading to excruciating pain, decompression sickness, and ultimately, death. Rascher's experiments were not only scientifically flawed, but also inhumane. The subjects endured unbearable suffering as they struggled for breath and experienced the agonizing effects of decompression. Rascher's research had no practical applications and served as a cruel form of torture. The horrors of the Nazi medical experiments led to a reckoning in the form of the Nuremberg trials. During these trials, key figures involved in the experiments were held accountable for their crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg Code, established after these trials, laid down ethical principles that continue to guide research involving human subjects today. The Nuremberg Code emphasizes the crucial nature of informed consent, voluntary participation, and avoiding unnecessary suffering in scientific experiments. It is a testament to the international community's commitment to ensuring that research is conducted with the utmost respect for human rights and dignity. The Nazi medical experiments represent a dark and harrowing chapter in the history of scientific research. These experiments, characterized by cruelty, sadism, and a complete disregard for human life, serve as a clear indication of the ethical responsibilities that must govern scientific inquiry. While the Nazi medical experiments are among the most extreme examples of research misconduct, they have played a pivotal role in shaping modern research ethics. The legacy of these atrocities serves as a constant reminder of the need for rigorous ethical oversight and the protection of human rights in all scientific endeavors. These are the experiments at the tip of the iceberg, ones that have left an indelible mark on the history of science and ethics. But as we journey deeper, we'll discover even more unsettling experiments hidden from the public eye. So stay with us as we unveil the lesser-known, deeply disturbing experiments beneath the surface of the human experiments iceberg. As we journey deeper into the human experiments iceberg, we reach the chilling waters where lesser-known and deeply disturbing experiments are concealed from public view. Hidden beneath the surface, these experiments reveal even more unsettling facets of human research. Let's plunge into these hidden depths and confront the haunting realities of human experimentation. Our journey takes us to Unit 731, a secretive Japanese biological warfare research unit during World War II. Led by Shiro Ishii, this unit conducted gruesome experiments on Chinese, Korean, and other prisoners. The experiments at Unit 731 included vivisections, frostbite studies, and the deliberate spread of diseases. These acts of cruelty were committed in the name of developing biological weapons. Unit 731 remains one of the darkest chapters in wartime medical research. The victims, often referred to as logs, endured excruciating suffering without consent. Vivisections were performed without anesthesia, and prisoners were exposed to extreme conditions to study the effects of biological warfare agents. In this exploration, we will delve deeper into the horrifying details of the experiments conducted by Unit 731, the individuals involved, and the lasting impact on the victims and the world. One of the most chilling aspects of Unit 731's experiments was the vivisections of human beings. Vivisections involves the dissection of living creatures, typically animals or humans, for scientific research. In the case of Unit 731, humans suffered this unspeakable fate. Prisoners at Unit 731 were subjected to vivisections without the luxury of anesthesia. The reasoning behind this barbarity was to study the effects of various diseases on the human body in a live state. Doctors and researchers at the facility wanted to understand how these diseases affected organs, tissues, and bodily functions, all while the victims were fully conscious and in unimaginable pain. The experiments went beyond mere observation. Victims were often intentionally infected with diseases like anthrax, bubonic plague, and syphilis. Researchers would then dissect them at various stages of the disease's progression, documenting their gruesome effects on the body. These inhumane experiments resulted in agonizing deaths for the victims, who were left to suffer without any semblance of humanity. Unit 731's cruelty extended to frostbite studies. Another facet of their twisted research, prisoners were subjected to extreme cold conditions to observe the effects of frostbite and find ways to treat it effectively. They were often left outdoors in freezing temperatures for extended periods, their limbs intentionally exposed to the bitter cold. The consequences to these experiments were horrific. Prisoners experienced severe frostbite, which led to the freezing and blackening of their extremities. In many cases, gangrene set in, and amputations were performed without anesthesia to study the effects of these surgeries on frostbitten limbs. Once again, the victims endured unbearable pain, all in the context of scientific advancement in biological warfare. Another gruesome aspect of Unit 731's activities was the deliberate spreading of diseases. Prisoners were infected with various pathogens, and their conditions were closely monitored. This practice aimed to develop more potent biological weapons by studying the progression of diseases in a controlled environment. For instance, researchers at Unit 731 conducted experiments with bubonic plague. Prisoners were infected with the deadly bacterium and then subjected to various treatments, including the administration of experimental drugs. The goal was to find an effective remedy for bubonic plague that could be used to protect Japanese soldiers in the event of biological warfare. The ethical and moral implications of these experiments are profound. They underscore the horrors that can result when science is weaponized and human rights are disregarded. Pursuing scientific knowledge should never come at the cost of human lives and dignity. Unit 731 was not just a faceless organization. It was comprised of scientists, doctors, and military personnel who willingly participated in these heinous experiments. Shiro Ishii, the unit's leader, was pivotal in orchestrating and overseeing these atrocities. Ishii, a highly educated medical doctor, justified his actions by arguing that they were essential for the defense of Japan. He believed that by developing biological weapons and studying their effects on human subjects, he was contributing to Japan's military strength. This twisted ideology led him and his colleagues to commit acts of cruelty that are difficult to comprehend. It's important to note that many of those involved in Unit 731's activities were never held accountable for their actions. After World War II, the United States granted immunity to Ishii and his associates in exchange for the data they had collected. This decision remains a source of controversy and moral outrage to this day. The victims of Unit 731's experiments suffered unimaginably. Those who suffered often carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Their stories serve as a disturbing reminder of the atrocities committed in the name of science and warfare. Furthermore, the legacy of Unit 731 extends beyond the immediate victims. The data collected during these experiments was used in the development of biological weapons. This research contributed to a dangerous arms race during the Cold War, where both the United States and the Soviet Union developed and stockpiled biological weapons. The revelation of Unit 731's activities has had a profound impact on discussions about the ethics of scientific research. It has prompted international efforts to establish ethical guidelines for human experimentation and to ensure that the horrors of Unit 731 are never repeated. Unit 731 is a dark and disturbing example of the depths human beings can sink in pursuing scientific knowledge and military power. The experiments were morally reprehensible and scientifically flawed, lacking the rigorous controls and ethical considerations necessary for valid research. The horrors of Unit 731 should serve as a stark warning to all of us about the importance of ethics, morality, and human rights in scientific research. It is a reminder that science must always be conducted with the utmost respect for the dignity and well-being of all individuals, and that the pursuit of knowledge should never come at the expense of human lives. As we reflect on the atrocities committed by Unit 731, let us reaffirm our commitment to upholding the principles of ethics and humanity in all scientific endeavors. Our next unsettling chapter brings us to the Guatemala syphilis experiment, conducted in the 1940s. In this dark episode, researchers deliberately infected Guatemalan subjects, including prisoners and mental health patients, with syphilis. The victims were unknowingly subjected to the bacteria, leading to severe health consequences. This experiment raises profound ethical questions about informed consent and the exploitation of vulnerable populations. The Guatemala syphilis experiment stands as a stark example of unethical medical research. The subjects were not informed of the risks involved, and their consent was neither informed nor voluntary. In one particularly heartbreaking case, a young Guatemalan woman named Maria was deceived into participating in the study. She believed she was receiving treatment for a minor ailment, but instead, she was infected with syphilis. Her life took a tragic turn as the disease progressed, causing immense suffering and hardship. Maria's story, among many others, serves as a lingering reminder of the devastating impact of unethical medical research on individuals and communities. The exploitation of vulnerable populations in the name of science is a shameful chapter in the history of medical ethics. The aftermath of this experiment led to apologies from the US government and renewed emphasis on the value of informed consent and ethical oversight in medical research. These apologies were a step towards acknowledging the grave mistake made in the Guatemala syphilis experiment. They also highlighted the need for stringent ethical guidelines to protect the privileges and health of research subjects, ensuring that such atrocities are never repeated. In the annals of medical history, the Guatemala syphilis experiment remains a dark stain, a reminder of the ethical boundaries that must never be crossed in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. It is a stark example of the terrible consequences that can arise when the principles of informed consent and respect for human dignity are ignored. Turning our focus to the Willowbrook State School study, we enter the realm of controversial hepatitis experiments conducted on disabled children in the 1950s. In a disturbing twist, researchers intentionally exposed children to the hepatitis virus to study the disease's progression. This experiment raises troubling questions about the treatment of vulnerable populations and the role of informed consent. The Willowbrook State School study is a distressing example of how vulnerable populations, in this case, intellectually disabled children, can be exploited with a scientific perspective. Among the young participants was a boy named Tommy, who could not fully comprehend the experiment's consequences. He, like the other children, was subjected to the hepatitis virus without fully understanding the risks involved. Tommy's innocence was taken advantage of in the name of scientific advancement. Tommy's story, among those of other children involved, serves as a heart-wrenching reminder of the ethical boundaries crossed during the Willowbrook State School study. The public outcry and criticism that followed the revelation of these experiments were vehement. Families and advocates for disabled individuals were rightfully outraged by the mistreatment of vulnerable children. This episode highlights the need for ethical safeguards to protect the rights and dignity of research subjects, especially when working with individuals who may not fully understand the implications of their participation. In the aftermath of the Willowbrook State School study, there was a call for more rigorous ethical oversight and the development of guidelines to ensure that the safety and prosperity of vulnerable populations are never compromised in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. In the annals of medical research, the Willowbrook State School study remains a clear testament to the grave consequences of disregarding the principles of informed consent and exploiting those most in need of protection and care. Our final destination in this segment takes us to the shadowy world of MKUltra, a covert CIA mind control program during the Cold War era. Under this program, unsuspecting individuals were subjected to experiments involving drugs like LSD and various psychological manipulations. These experiments had lasting psychological effects on victims and raised significant ethical concerns about government-sponsored research. The MKUltra experiments involved highly secretive and often unethical methods to explore mind control and behavior modification. Subjects were often unaware of the nature of the experiments and the risks involved. Among those who suffered from the consequences of MKUltra experiments was a man named John. He was subjected to mind-altering substances without his knowledge or consent. The trauma he endured haunted him for the rest of his life, leaving an indelible scar on his mental health. John's story, along with countless others, serves as a chilling reminder of the ethical boundaries that were ruthlessly crossed during the MKUltra program. The revelation of MKUltra and its shocking experiments prompted public outrage in congressional hearings. The secrecy and lack of oversight were exposed, leading to calls for greater transparency and accountability. This chapter serves as a striking example of the ethical boundaries that can be crossed when pursuing national security interests overshadows ethical considerations. It underscores the importance of transparency, informed consent, and ethical oversight in research conducted by government agencies. MKUltra remains a haunting reminder of the consequences when ethical principles are sacrificed in the name of secrecy and national security. It is a cautionary tale that reinforces the need for vigilance in upholding ethical standards and safeguarding the advantages and happiness of research subjects. These experiments, from the hidden depths of the human experiment's iceberg, reveal the darkest aspects of scientific research. Each one underscores the imperative of ethical safeguards, informed consent, and the protection of human rights in all research endeavors. As our journey progresses, we will delve into 4 of history's most contentious instances of human experimentation. We aim to reveal the personal narratives entwined with these morally questionable practices, their effects on those affected, and the enduring teachings they provide about the significance of maintaining ethical standards in scientific research and policy formulation. Our first stop takes us to the haunting world of the monster study, also known as the Iowa speech experiment, conducted in the 1930s. This experiment, which aimed to study the development of stuttering in children, had a profoundly negative impact on young subjects. Children, many of whom were orphans, were subjected to harsh criticism and negative feedback about their speech, leading to lasting psychological trauma. The monster study remains a troubling example of unethical research on vulnerable populations. The children involved were subjected to psychological harm without informed consent, and the experiment's negative effects on their self-esteem and speech development were long-lasting. Among the participants was Sarah, who had been placed in an orphanage. Sarah, like the other children, was led to believe that she had a speech disorder when, in fact, she did not. The experimenter's cruel criticisms left her deeply scarred and struggling with speech issues for years. Sarah's story, along with those of other children involved, serves as a heart-wrenching reminder of the ethical boundaries crossed during the monster study. The revelation of the monster study and its unethical treatment of vulnerable children sparked public outrage and condemnation. It raised fundamental questions about the responsibility of researchers and the protection of children's rights. This episode underscores the responsibility of researchers and the need for strict ethical oversight when working with children and other vulnerable groups. In the wake of the monster study, there were renewed calls for ethical guidelines and protections for research involving children. It highlighted understanding the gravity of informed consent, respect for the well-being of subjects, and the avoidance of psychological harm in research practices. In the history of scientific research, the monster study stands as a painful reminder of the suffering that can result when ethical considerations are neglected in the pursuit of knowledge. It's a powerful lesson in the need for compassion, transparency, and the rigorous ethical oversight in all research involving vulnerable populations. The next unsettling experiment is the Little Albert experiment, conducted in 1920 by John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner at Johns Hopkins University. This experiment aimed to study conditioned emotional responses in a young child, infamously known as Little Albert. Little Albert was exposed to various stimuli, such as a white rat. These were paired with startling sounds to create a conditioned fear response. A seemingly ordinary object, like a rat, became a source of terror for the child. The ethical concerns of this experiment are deeply troubling. Little Albert, only a child, was subjected to psychological distress without his or his guardian's consent. The story of Little Albert and the experiment's impact on his emotional well-being have been debated and scrutinized over the years. The experiment has been criticized for its lack of ethical standards and disregard for the child's psychological health. The revelation of the experiment's details led to widespread condemnation in public and academic circles. It raised essential questions about the ethics of psychological experimentation, especially involving children. The Little Albert experiment has become a textbook example of ethical missteps in psychological research. It underscores the necessity of informed consent, the importance of minimizing harm, and the need to prioritize the well-being of research subjects. In response to such controversial studies, there have been significant advancements in ethical guidelines for psychological research. The Little Albert experiment is a strong notice of the potential consequences when ethical considerations are sidelined in the quest for scientific knowledge. As we look back at the history of psychology, the Little Albert experiment stands out as a cautionary tale. It teaches us the critical importance of ethical responsibility and human compassion in scientific inquiry, particularly when dealing with vulnerable individuals like children. The Little Albert experiment remains a controversial and haunting episode in the annals of psychology. Decades have passed since John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner conducted this research, but its impact continues to reverberate through psychology, ethics, and research methodology. To fully grasp the significance of this experiment, let's delve deeper into its history, the ethical concerns it raised, and the lasting lessons it offers. In the early 20th century, behaviorism was gaining prominence as a dominant school of thought in psychology. Behaviorists believed that psychology should focus solely on observable behaviors and eschew the study of inner mental processes. John B. Watson, a prominent behaviorist, was at the forefront of this movement, advocating for a strict empiricism that emphasized environmental factors in shaping human behavior. It was against this backdrop that the Little Albert experiment was conceived. The study aimed to test Watson's theory that emotional responses could be conditioned in individuals through classical conditioning. Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner chose an 11-month-old boy, Little Albert, as their subject. The experiment involved exposing Little Albert to various stimuli, including a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, cotton wool, burning newspapers, and a mask with a Santa Claus beard. Initially, Little Albert displayed no fear of these objects. However, Watson and Rayner sought to condition his fear response by pairing these stimuli with loud, startling sounds produced by striking a steel bar with a hammer. Little Albert became progressively more afraid of the previously neutral stimuli, especially the white rat. The ethical concerns surrounding this experiment are palpable and profound. First and foremost, Little Albert was a baby who could not provide informed consent to participate in this research. His mother, who worked at the hospital, allowed her child to be part of the study without fully understanding the extent of the emotional distress it would cause him. Little Albert's lack of agency in this situation is deeply troubling and raises serious ethical questions about the consent process. Furthermore, the emotional trauma inflicted on Little Albert is undeniable. He was subjected to intense fear and anxiety without any consideration for his psychological well-being. The experiment violated his rights as a vulnerable research subject, and he had no means to communicate or express his distress. This ethical breach is glaring in hindsight and has sparked heated debates in both academic and public spheres. The story of Little Albert and the experiment's impact on his emotional well-being have been debated and scrutinized over the years. Researchers have tried to uncover the true identity of Little Albert and his life after the experiment. While some sources suggest that he may have overcome his fears, others indicate that he continued to suffer from emotional issues related to the experiment. The debate surrounding the Little Albert experiment extends beyond the ethics of using a child in a study of this nature. It also raises questions about the validity and reliability of the research findings. Critics argue that Little Albert's fear responses may have been influenced by factors other than classical conditioning. For instance, his emotional state before the experiment or the presence of Watson and Rayner during the trials could have affected his reactions. The revelation of the experiment's details led to widespread condemnation in public and academic circles. The press covered the story extensively, and newspaper headlines painted a grim picture of the research's ethical implications. In the wake of the controversy, John B. Watson was asked to leave Johns Hopkins University, signaling the seriousness of the situation. Academic discussions surrounding the Little Albert experiment were equally heated. Many psychologists and researchers criticized the experiment's methodology, ethical violations, and the generalizability of its findings. The experiment became a rallying point for those advocating for more rigorous ethical standards in psychological research. The Little Albert experiment has become a textbook example of ethical missteps in psychological research. It underscores the necessity of informed consent, the importance of minimizing harm, and the need to prioritize the well-being of research subjects. As a result of this and similar controversies, significant advancements have been made in developing ethical guidelines for psychological research. One of the most significant outcomes of the Little Albert experiment was the establishment of ethical review boards and the implementing of strict ethical guidelines for conducting research involving human subjects. Institutional review boards, or IRBs, were created to ensure that research adheres to strict ethical standards, including obtaining informed consent, minimizing harm, and ensuring the confidentiality of participants. The American Psychological Association also developed its own code of ethics, which guides psychologists and researchers. This code emphasizes the importance of informed consent, protection of participants' rights, and the obligation to prioritize their welfare. In retrospect, the Little Albert experiment is an evident alert to the potential consequences when ethical considerations are sidelined in the quest for scientific knowledge. It highlights the responsibility that researchers and institutions have towards their research subjects, mainly when vulnerable individuals like children are involved. As we look back at the history of psychology, the Little Albert experiment stands out as a cautionary tale. It teaches us the importance of ethical responsibility and human compassion in scientific inquiry. It reminds us that scientific progress should never come at the cost of well-being and dignity of individuals involved in research. The Little Albert experiment remains a dark stain on the history of psychology, serving as an obvious demonstration of the ethical responsibilities inherent in scientific research. While it may have contributed to our understanding of classical conditioning, it did so at the unacceptable cost of the emotional well-being of a vulnerable child. As we move forward, we must continue to uphold the principles of informed consent, minimize harm, and prioritize the welfare of research subjects, ensuring that no future experiments follow in the footsteps of Little Albert. Our next disturbing chapter brings us to South Africa's Aversion project, which took place during the apartheid era. This program involved the forced chemical castration of homosexual men and inflicted severe psychological harm. The long-term implications of the Aversion project on LGBTQ+ rights and ethical boundaries of medical research are profound. The Aversion project represents a grave violation of human rights and ethical principles. Homosexual men were subjected to aversion therapy without their informed consent, resulting in lasting psychological trauma. This episode raises questions about the ethical conduct of medical professionals and the imperative of informed, voluntary participation in research. Let's delve deeper into the haunting legacy of the Aversion project, shedding light on its horrifying consequences through real-life stories and compelling examples. One particularly poignant account is that of Simon Nicoli, a prominent South African gay rights activist who endured the horrors of the Aversion project. In the 1980s, Simon was arrested and subjected to chemical castration as part of this inhumane program. The physical and emotional scars from this ordeal haunted him for the rest of his life. Despite the immense suffering he endured, Simon Nicoli went on to become a leading figure in the fight for LGBTQ+ rights in South Africa, displaying remarkable resilience and courage in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Another chilling example is the case of Dr. Aubrey Levin, the psychiatrist who oversaw the Aversion project. He was responsible for administering aversion therapy and conducting unethical experiments on countless victims. Dr. Levin's actions raised disturbing questions about the role of medical professionals in perpetrating human rights abuses. His abuse of power and disregard for the well-being of his patients serve as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by those who prioritize ideology over ethics. The Aversion project also left a lasting impact on LGBTQ+ rights in South Africa. While apartheid may have ended, the scars of this dark chapter still linger. The survivors of the Aversion project continue to grapple with the trauma inflicted upon them, and the broader LGBTQ+ community faces ongoing challenges in their pursuit of equal rights and recognition. Furthermore, the Aversion project serves as a cautionary tale about the ethical boundaries of medical research. It underscores the absolute necessity of informed consent and the importance of upholding the fundamental principles of medical ethics. The world should never forget the suffering endured by those who were victimized by this program, and we must remain vigilant to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. The Aversion project is a harrowing example of the lengths to which prejudice and discrimination can lead. It robbed individuals of their dignity, physical and mental well-being, and fundamental human rights. It is a stark reminder that we must always strive to protect the rights and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation, and that ethical principles should never be sacrificed in the pursuit of ideology or prejudice. Our final destination delves into allegations of human experimentation in North Korea conducted in secrecy and often within political prison camps. North Korea, a nation known for its extreme secrecy and authoritarian regime, has been the subject of numerous allegations regarding human rights abuses. Among the most disturbing of these are the claims of human experimentation. This essay delves into the available evidence and testimonies regarding human experimentation in North Korea, exploring the ethical, political, and human rights implications. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, commonly known as North Korea, has remained one of the world's most secretive and isolated nations since its establishment in 1948. Led by the Kim dynasty, the regime has been accused of numerous human rights violations, including public executions, forced labor camps, and severe restrictions on freedom of expression. Reports of human experimentation in North Korea primarily come from defectors who have fled the country. These testimonies often describe horrifying scenes where prisoners, including women and children, are allegedly used as subjects in chemical and biological weapons tests. The KINU, or the Korea Institute for National Unification in South Korea, has documented several accounts of such practices in its annual white papers on human rights in North Korea. One notable testimony comes from Im Chung-young, a former North Korean military officer who claimed to have witnessed a family being used in a gas chamber experiment. Similarly, a report from the North Korean Strategy Center recounted a defector's testimony about a disabled child born in a prison camp being used for biological weapon testing. The secretive nature of the North Korean regime makes it extremely difficult to verify these allegations. The country's closed borders and the absence of independent media or international observers create a significant challenge in substantiating the claims made by the defectors. Moreover, the North Korean government has consistently denied such accusations, dismissing them as propaganda against the regime. If true, these allegations represent a gross violation of human rights and ethical standards. The use of humans, especially vulnerable populations like prisoners, in experimentation without consent is condemned by international laws and treaties. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which North Korea is a signatory, explicitly states the right to life and prohibits cruel or degrading treatment. The international community, led by organizations like the United Nations and various human rights NGOs, has expressed concern over these reports. However, the response has been primarily limited to condemnations and sanctions due to the geopolitical complexities surrounding North Korea, including its nuclear capabilities and the sensitive relationship with neighboring countries like South Korea and China. The allegations of human experimentation in North Korea, while challenging to verify, raise critical questions about the extent of human rights violations in the country. These reports, coming from those who have risked their lives to flee the regime, paint a disturbing picture of the government that places little value on human life and dignity. The international community's role in addressing these issues is complicated but necessary, requiring a nuanced approach that balances the geopolitical realities with the imperative to uphold human rights. As the world continues to grapple with the enigma of North Korea, the plight of those who may be suffering within its borders must not be forgotten. As we near the end of our exploration into the complex and often controversial world of human experiments, it's crucial to reflect on the multifaceted aspects we've uncovered. Human experimentation, a field that treads the thin line between groundbreaking scientific discovery and ethical dilemmas, demands our utmost attention and understanding. Historically, human experiments have been a cornerstone in advancing medical and scientific knowledge. From groundbreaking work on the human genome to the development of life-saving vaccines, human subjects have played a vital role in many of the most significant scientific breakthroughs. However, this progress has not been without its dark chapters. Instances like the Tuskegee syphilis study and the experiments conducted during World War II remind us of the profound ethical breaches that can occur when the sanctity of human life is overlooked in the pursuit of knowledge. In considering the ethical implications, it's clear that human experimentation is a domain fraught with moral complexities. The fundamental question revolves around the balance between potential scientific gains and the rights and well-being of participants. Ethical guidelines such as informed consent and the prioritization of participants' welfare have been established to navigate these challenges. These guidelines are the cornerstone in ensuring that human dignity and autonomy are upheld in all research endeavors. Recently, we've witnessed a significant evolution in the ethical oversight of human experiments. Institutional review boards and ethical committees are crucial in overseeing research involving human subjects. Their mandate to assess the risk-benefit ratio of experiments ensures that ethical considerations are not an afterthought but a prerequisite. This evolution marks a critical shift from a past where ethical breaches were more familiar to a present where participant welfare is paramount. Scientifically, the landscape of human experimentation continues to evolve with advancements in technology and medicine. Cutting-edge fields like gene editing, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology are pushing the boundaries of what's possible while raising new ethical questions. For instance, CRISPR technology presents opportunities for curing genetic diseases but also opens the door to potential misuse, like the creation of so-called designer babies. These advancements necessitate a continuous and evolving dialogue between scientists, ethicists, and the public to navigate the ethical minefields they present. As we look to the future, the role of public awareness and engagement in the discourse around human experiments cannot be overstated. The decisions made in laboratories and ethics committees have far-reaching implications for society. Therefore, the public must be informed and actively engaged in these conversations. Public forums, educational initiatives, and transparent reporting are essential in fostering an informed citizenry that can contribute meaningfully to these discussions. Moreover, the international dimension of human experimentation adds another layer of complexity. Countries have varying ethical standards and regulatory frameworks, leading to ethical dilemmas in cross-border research. It underscores the need for a global consensus and harmonized ethical guidelines to ensure that human rights are uniformly protected, irrespective of geographical boundaries. The journey through the world of human experiments is a reminder of humanity's relentless pursuit of knowledge, tempered by the sobering reality of ethical responsibility. As we forge ahead in this ever-evolving field, let us carry forward the past's lessons, the present's obligations, and the aspirations for a future where scientific advancement and ethical integrity are not mutually exclusive, but interwoven into the very fabric of research. Let's commit to a path where the pursuit of knowledge is always aligned with the highest standards of human dignity and ethics. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.